Angie too. All right, I think we're ready. So thank you everyone for attending our our Community Advisory Committee meeting number 13. This is our second to the last meeting of this committee. So, hey, we're almost done. A big congratulations to all of you. So I think we're just going to go around the table really quick and then introduce ourselves. Then after our introductions, we'll get into any public comments. And then from there, we'll just roll into the presentation. So I'm going to start with Chris and we'll just go.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Zalhas. I'm a principal at Leland Consulting Group, part of the consulting team, and I'll be presenting tonight on the preliminary funding strategy.
And I'm Erica Palmer, Planning Manager for the City of Sherwood. And I just want to remind all of you tonight, please turn your microphone on and speak into the microphone when and if you have something to say to the committee. And also as a reminder, if your microphone is on and you're tapping your pen, everyone at home can hear it as well. So just be mindful tonight. That's all I ask.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ellen Binney. I'm an analyst with Leland Consulting Group.
My name is Mike Black. I'm just a community member.
Emily Campbell, community member.
I'm Conrad Sproul. I'm a resident on Elwood Road in the north area.
Angie Ford, community member.
Brian Fairbanks, community member.
Brian Dorsey, community member and chair of the Police Advisory Board.
Rodney Lister, community member, part of the Parks Board.
Kennedy Hawkins, community member.
Jean Simpson, community member and chair of the Planning Commission.
Tamara First, community member.
Great, so rolling along here into community comments. I forwarded 4 community comments that were received to the CAC yesterday, and they are included as part of your packet, and they can be found online on the city's project page currently at the moment. For the record, I just want to quickly summarize who were they from and what their concerns or issues that they brought up to the committee. So the first community comment came from Brian Billette, and overall, his summary, he wanted to express that the city of Sherwood should not venture into the direction of using property tax means, including like general obligation bonds, supplemental SCDCs, or local improvement districts to finance any parts of the project. We did receive comment from a Metropolitan Land Group, and one of the issues that they wanted to bring up to the CAC was to relook at the hospitality area on the plan map and to kind of encourage more flexibility and have it as an overlay. The next community comment came from Dennis Christian, and he supports the city moving forward with the UGB expansion next year. And then the final comment from the community came from Brian Fields, and Brian is expressing his concerns with the diversion of Elwood Road and would like the CAC to, continue Elwood Road in its current location, to keep it in its current location moving forward. So with that, I would like to ask if there's any community members in the audience this evening that would like to provide any additional public comments, and if so, if you could raise your hand. I think I saw Brian. You're the, okay. So Brian, you will have 3 minutes, and then I will provide you a microphone.
Good evening, members of the CAC. Thank you for your time. My name is Brian Fields. I am a resident of Eastview Road, and that is in the far west area of the Urban Growth Reserve. And I am here tonight because I would like to state my opposition to the proposed Elwert realignment. The funding gap analysis in this CAC meeting's agenda demonstrates the county will need to provide a major portion of the funding for any Elwert Road improvements. The city should work collaboratively with the county to arrive at a plan for Elwert Road improvements. The county has an interest in maintaining and improving the regional transportation network. The concept plan realignment of Elwert Road undermines the capacity of Elwert Road to serve as a regional connector. It's unrealistic to think that the county will be able to commit funds to a plan that undermines its responsibilities to maintain and improve the regional transportation network. Also, the proposed alignment would have a negative impact on other local interests. The realignment would require 2 new crossings of Chicken Creek. Improvements to Elwert should remediate the existing environmental impacts, not despoil additional areas. The realignment would significantly slow down Highway 99 access for residents on Edie Road west of Elwert Road. The proposed roundabout will add additional distance and multiple turns. Failing to improve Elwert Road capacity will have spillover impacts on Highway 99 and Sherwood residents in general. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate, improving the capacity of Elwert Road is in the interest of current Sherwood residents. It offers better environmental options and will be a priority for the city's major funding partner, Washington County. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Brian. And I am still getting used to these hybrid meetings. You're probably all wondering who's on the screen this evening. Darcy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you. Darcy Rudzinski. I'm with MIG, and I am a principal and project manager. And I'm here to support Kate and the city as you head to the finish with this plan. Glad to be here with you tonight.
And I'm Kate Rogers with MIG. Sorry for being late. Traffic was a bear out there.
No, that's okay. So with that, Kate, perfect timing.
Oh, yes. What are we doing?
I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think,
How do we queue up the slides?
oh, there we
Oh,
go.
there it is. Okay. Is that?
And then you can go to the screen view right down
Yep.
there.
Awesome. Okay, so this is our agenda for this evening. We already got through introductions and public comment. And then Chris and his colleague Ellen will talk about the infrastructure funding strategy, the preliminary draft, which is still kind of, the analysis is still in work, and Chris will share some more details about that, but we'll give you some sort of initial results. And then we'll talk about the draft concept plan outline, which is just kind of the, the framework for what that document will look like and our approach. And if you all have some comments or suggestions about that, would be happy to hear those. And then we'll talk about the revisions to the concept plan maps based on your most recent input at the last CAC meeting, and just make sure those are good to go to include in the concept plan itself. And then we'll just talk about next steps and wrap it up. So I will hand it over to Chris to talk about infrastructure.
Thank you. So hopefully you all had a chance to read the preliminary draft memo. Lots of wishy-washy words there to confirm that this is preliminary information for a concept plan. So we're doing some very kind of high-level thinking around the costs of the infrastructure for the concept plan, and then the likely revenue sources that would help pay for that key infrastructure. A little bit about the methodology we use and some of the information that went into this. The costs were primarily provided to us by the city, and we're largely looking in this analysis at the water, sewer, stormwater, and transportation elements, that kind of framework structure that makes the development of the individual development areas and sites within the project area possible. We did not have parks costs or estimate those costs, so we looked at the revenues for parks from parks fees, but that's sort of a holdout from this analysis. We also, and what's important, is development costs that would be internal to a development site are assumed to be developer costs, and so local roads, neighborhood streets, those are not factored in here. Developers will build that and pay for that as a part of their business. On the revenue side, we based our revenue assumptions off of the city's existing system development charge, SDC, fee table, which developers pay when they come in for building permits, as well as Clean Water Services connection charge and Washington County's transportation development tax, which is also collected at the city level, but it's a separate fee for transportation. So, and our emphasis on this preliminary analysis was for two catalyst development areas. So the two areas that we think will develop first and are priorities for the plan. One is the north area, which is planned for as an employment district, as you've seen in the concept plan, and then the south and southwest area for where the hospitality zone is and some of the more mixed use components of the project. On the screen are a whole bunch of line item costs that went into our analysis that we got from the city. Again, I want to emphasize these are very preliminary. They're largely based off of some of the infrastructure assumptions from the original 2016 plan and have been brought to 2022 or $23. Because we're at such a early level of detail, there's a 25% contingency built into each of these costs. So a lot of the that will get refined over time, but it's a big cushion is built into these numbers. So that's why some of them are quite high. But we're primarily looking for what are those infrastructure projects that would be needed first to open up these areas for development. So I won't read through all the bullets on the slide, but we go into a little bit about the revenue analysis in our memo. And all I will say is it's a tricky science when we're dealing with very high level concept plans, because some of the revenues all of the revenues are tied to specific either unit counts of residential or square footage of commercial. Again, at the building permit stage is when they get paid. So we need to know specifically what is going to get built in order to run some numbers and see how much capacity there is. So we had to make some gross assumptions around that. And we did that in a range from low to high, depending on a low density housing assumption or a more higher density housing assumption that assumes a higher degree of middle housing in the plan. And then likewise on the commercial, it gets even more complicated, particularly for the sewer impact fees, because those are tied based on the tenant type of the actual sewer flow that's generated by a project. So again, we made some very broad assumptions with the help of the city engineer on using some averages in order to generate the projections. It is useful at this stage of planning, though, so that we can get a kind of a very high level ballpark of, how big a shortfall might we be looking at, or surplus, if that's the case, for the different infrastructure types, given the entirety of the development of Sherwood West. And then where there is a shortfall, what are the strategies for filling that gap? So these are sort of some of the four scenarios that we looked at, ranging from low density housing with no middle housing and low water using commercial uses in the commercial zones, up to a higher degree of middle housing and a higher water using commercial uses like restaurants and things like that. So a little bit about the key findings that we found. this, and I won't go into all the details, but these are the revenues by impact fee or SDC source, so water, sewer, storm, parks, and transportation. The sewer and the transportation both include the sewer includes, whoops, sorry about that. The sewer includes the clean water services charges, and the transportation includes the transportation development tax in addition to the city's fee. This slide shows the gaps, and a couple things on this. One, the infrastructure costs that we were looking at did not assume a Chicken Creek bridge. So if we were, it included, I believe, just the road crossing on the existing alignment and improvements to that, but not a bridge. So that's one reason why this is very different than I'm used to seeing in a lot of planning projects where there's actually more potential transportation money than you have projects, is because we may be leaving out some critical projects. You'll see the water and the stormwater have some pretty big shortfalls, and then the sewer has a surplus, and parks is a surplus only because we have not included any parks in our modeling. But the more important, I think, big part of the conversation that I'd like to talk about is a little bit about, okay, where those gaps exist, and we're going to be continuing to do a little bit more tweaking and refining of the costs and the revenue assumptions. We had a technical advisory committee meeting this afternoon and got some good input on how to make some adjustments to that. But I want to talk about these funding tools from the bottom up. And we started with the funding tools that were presented in the 2016 concept plan, which was a thorough look at tools that are available to cities in Oregon to help fund that kind of regional armature infrastructure in planning areas. And then from that, we wanted to look and see, are there changes to any of the rules or regulations that might bring new ones to the table, or maybe take some of the prior ones off the table. And what we found was really the answer to that is no. What was valid then is valid today. But we have some more targeted recommendations about what we think the plan and the city could focus on going forward. So working from the bottom up, the things that we don't really recommend or think are maybe not so easy tools to utilize in this particular instance. One is urban renewal. That can be used to pay for infrastructure. That's its ideal use. But a couple reasons why we don't think it's a great application here. One, urban renewal is typically used in redevelopment areas, less so in new greenfield areas. There's potentially a timing issue of when you need the money up front to build the infrastructure versus when urban renewal typically collects money, which is over time as properties get developed. And then third, the city already has a couple urban renewal districts, and there are statutory limitations to how much of the city's geography and tax base can be in a district, and so there might be some limitations on that. Yes?
Yeah, we're closing out a URA. We just started, just so everybody knows, we just started a new URA. I believe it's a 30-year time frame. I would add, though, you can bond against future URA revenue and accelerate these dollars, but I agree with your assessment in terms of these projects.
Yeah. And I mean, you can bond against it, but you probably need a little bit of a track record of on the pace of it, some certainty about the development that's going to happen and how quickly that will happen. General obligation bonds, GO bonds, the city issuing bonds under its own, full faith and credit of the city, probably very unlikely. They can be, I would say they're typically appropriate for projects of citywide benefit. So to the extent that most of the infrastructure projects here are for the benefit of Sherwood West, but are not necessarily citywide projects, I would say that probably would not likely get the level of political support and community support for the whole city to pitch in and pay for. Often requires voter approval. I don't know if that's the case here in Sherwood, but typically yes. So again, just a pretty heavy community lift to get buy-in to utilize a tool like that. Utility fees have been used in some cities, so tacking on charges to utility bills for transportation often. Again, that's something that would typically be done at a citywide level and would be applicable for citywide benefiting projects. So again, we see that as kind of a higher lift. Local improvement districts are possible. Often see those done for road projects, road paving and such, but typically on a very localized level. LIDs require the buy-in or voting approval of the property owners that will be paying in. It's essentially an additional property tax. Or at a minimum, a majority do not object to the formation of the district. So it's something that could potentially have applicability in targeted locations within Sherwood West, but we wouldn't see it as something that would be applied across the entire area. And it would be a property owner-led initiative if that were the case. The supplemental SDC is the primary tool that we're going to talk about, but before I jump into the details of that, I'll talk about the top two. So regional sources, what we mean by that is looking at the traditional, particularly for transportation funding, regional funding systems where projects get put on lists and the traditional transportation funding, for example, is allocated regionally based on those lists. To the extent that these projects can rise to the top or get on those lists as regionally significant investments and become eligible for some of that regional funding, that can be an offset to any of the local funding that we bring in through development. And on the state sources, yeah, sorry.
Have had success.
Yep. Yeah, so I don't by no means discount that. It can be very significant, and is worthy. That's why we have the little check mark there. But it's definitely a long-term process, getting them on the list, competing against your neighboring cities and other cities in the region to elevate those projects in priority. The state sources, that's sort of an open-ended category of. Look to the legislature for money that could be brought in for projects that meet state objectives. So right now in the legislature, jobs, particularly around the chip industry and technology, is really important to the legislature. For that, when we met with developers, and I think I mentioned this in a prior meeting, they told us that they didn't see that northern employment area as a particularly regionally significant industrial area where large chip plants, for example, would locate. But if there were an opportunity for Sherwood West to attract or be a location for attracting the kinds of employment that is a priority at the legislature level, there's a good fit there, and it would be an opportunity for the city to lobby to potentially get some funding to make some shovel-ready industrial sites happen. And so I would not discount that. Maybe not in this legislative cycle, but in future years. So the main one that I want to talk about is the supplemental SDC. So we've used that in Wilsonville in the Frog Pond planning area that I've worked on along with MIG, where it's essentially you identify the funding gap and you develop a additional fee that's paid by developers to meet the gap. So it's essentially a developer pays whatever the funding shortfall is. It's paid at the time of permitting. It has all of the same kinds of benefits of the SDCs in terms of the city collecting it, the ability to have reimbursements over time as other developers pay into the fund. But a couple of key elements of how that would actually get put into place is, one, a whole lot more refinement needs to happen after the concept plan is completed to refine the costs of those projects, the timing of those projects, who's going to benefit from those projects, because it's conceivable that there is a single supplemental SDC that covers the entirety of Sherwood West. It's also possible that it might be carved into multiple supplemental SDCs if there's certain infrastructure projects that are really just benefiting certain quadrants of the project area. And like I said, really refining the costs. then bringing in a municipal finance consultant typically to help develop the actual funding strategy of what are the rates, how do you allocate those infrastructure costs to the to developers. A big part of that process would be engaging the development community itself. They're ultimately going to be the ones that foot the bill. They absolutely should be a part of the conversation and developing a funding mechanism that they'll support, so that when it comes ultimately to the Planning Commission and the City Council to adopt a resolution putting into place the fee, you've got good support and buy-in from those who are going to pay for it. That's probably a multi-year process to, as the engineering needs to be done to refine those costs and do that outreach. So that's the nut of it. We really think that there's lots of potential tools out there, long laundry list that could maybe pick away at the edges, but really the easiest and most straightforward and tool that the developers are familiar with is simply developing a supplemental fee that you would apply to meet the funding shortfalls. And so with that, I think we're ready to open it up for discussion and any questions that people have. And I appreciate that city staff is here to help answer some of the technical ones that are going to be beyond my pay scale.
As we go into next steps and looking at the colored map that we're using for zoning, both in the commercial and the residential, do you have a tool that we can use that will help us determine? There's big swings between the low density, low impact commercial and the high, and it's easy to understand low density and high density residential, but can you provide a tool for telling us high impact? Because my thought was that you mentioned restaurants because that's a sewer impact that's pretty high, but like the chip manufacturer, does that not also have a large water usage and a large discharge usage? So if we could have, like when we're going forward next steps, a list of what zoning generates high or low. Not that I need an answer, just as a tool when we're making decisions on especially at the next through the council when they're making their final determination and looking at the bucket of money that they're going to need to come up with. And the last part was that on the high residential, I see you used about 20%. I just want to ask Erica, and as we go forward, to make sure that we understand that if we think the middle housing is going to be a different impact, that we keep that in mind when we talk about the cost. Does that help us or hurt us when we go forward? Yeah.
And one of the updates that came out of this afternoon's TAC meeting was the transportation development tax fee has a provision where middle housing would gets assessed at condominium rates as opposed to single-family residential rates, which is how we modeled it. So that's one of the updates that we're going to do, which presumably would drop the revenues a little bit from what we've stated. Mm-hmm.
Back to Sherwood. So great presentation, but I don't want people concerned that we're going to immediately run out there and do a
right.
Or a bond or something like that.
Thank you for making that support. Even at first glance, a week or so ago, property tax jumped right out, and I didn't want to focus on that, and I know that's not our focus, but it was hard to not look, especially when you started looking at the matrix. This before you got in a deeper cut, the matrix was, it said something completely different than what we just talked about here, right? That's what was my takeaway, and I'm glad that that's been discussed tonight. Thank you.
When we start to really analyze all the different components, like the trails, and what they're just on trails, we can go after national parks dollars, state parks dollars, federal, there's all kinds of options.
Fantastic.
Yeah. The work of developing the funding strategy is kind of never done until you're building the infrastructure. It's, there's lots of different opportunities, and we hear you loud and clear, and that's why none of those priority funding strategies are not local taxes at all. They're largely essentially development funded or outside funding sources.
Have we been able to have any takeaways from the Brookman development as far as, I don't know if this is going to be more unique and original to us, but have we tried this approach before regarding the SDCs to sort of align them with what the developers are doing, and how successful have we been, or have we had some opportunities there?
That's a great question, Brent. So we do have a supplemental or an added SDC in Brookman. So we do have that, and we're using it. And I think we also heard from, well, at least I heard from the Home Builders Association that they're open, to the supplemental SDCs. I heard that after our meeting today. So
Great. Yeah, it's common, and they're used to paying for it, and but they'd like to be brought along in the conversation, of course, too. Yeah. Well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, we can move on to the next agenda item.
I just had a follow-up on Erica's comment on the supplemental SDCs in Brookman. Do you have numbers that say that that's working out, that they're paying their own way, or are we still coming out of the general fund to make or whatever pot of money that, is it paying its own way yet?
I don't have that answer for you. That's something I would have to talk to our finance department with to get you some numbers or some sort of analysis on how that's working out.
I have a quick question too. So we're considering this unique kind of what I think is a unique concept with this hospitality zoning. We have one hotel, we got another one with an application in. We could potentially be looking at 3 to 4 hotels, so we'll be generating significant TLT revenue. Are cities using TLT revenue in hospitality zones to build out infrastructures or pay for parts of them?
I would say not that I know of. Typically, the hotel tax revenues are spent on more tourism-related promotion and marketing types of, and operations types of activities, programmatic rather than capital investments. Yeah, I don't know of any examples offhand where it's been used to pay for. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we do see is in a lot of communities is, and I'll just say this, is opportunities to charge higher rates than the cities currently levy. So I don't know what your tax rate is for hotels is currently, but from some of the hospitality consultants that we've worked with, they've told me that rates up to like 13%, people don't blink an eye at it in terms of guests, and so if your rate's below that, there's potentially headroom to generate some additional funding for programs, but not necessarily for infrastructure.
All right, so we'll talk about the draft concept plan outline. So we're working on the draft now, and instead of bringing you, a partial draft or a few sections, we figured we would just kind of review the approach to the concept plan and the outline and what'll be in the plan, and see if you all have any comments or suggestions for that final document to kind of wrap up this whole project. So we want this document to be a really kind of user-friendly, reader-friendly document that's not super long and not super text heavy. So we're hoping to incorporate a lot of graphics and, precedent images of parks and housing and trails and a lot of the images that you've been kind of seeing throughout this process to kind of highlight the concepts that will be in the plan. So keeping the descriptive text to a minimum, keeping the sort of really technical things like the infrastructure funding strategy in the appendix for the most part, and just kind of pulling out key highlights from those analysis pieces into the document itself. And yeah, so that's the approach. And then the outline, it's pretty straightforward, kind of giving a brief summary for sort of each component of the process and each of the sort of recommendations and components of the concept plan itself. So it'll start with an executive summary, which is just a few pages, kind of giving sort of high level results and key findings and things like that. We'll give an overview of the planning process, kind of, again, really high level, how did we get to where we are today? Not going into a lot of the details there, but sort of just highlighting some of the key, the open houses that we held, obviously the importance of this group, the CAC, and how that was really, you all have been really instrumental in moving this process forward and providing a lot of in-depth feedback and really shaped the project. Review the vision and goals and evaluation criteria, which we use to kind of assess the various land use alternatives that we looked at. Give a brief summary of the existing conditions, which will look at, the existing transportation system, the existing land uses, natural resources obviously are a key piece of that, existing trails, surrounding land uses, things like that. And then we'll, summarize the land use alternatives. So we'll give kind of a brief look at the 3 different maps that you all helped kind of generate and what were some of the sort of key decision points in selecting the preferred alternative. And then shifting into the concept plan itself. So we will, again, kind of hit all of the sort of key things that we've been highlighting throughout this process. So in terms of land use, I think the mixed employment concept has been sort of a key driver of this plan. So that'll be one of the things that we highlight. Obviously, housing, the various housing issues that we've talked about throughout the process, and the housing variety being really important, and how we're kind of addressing and incorporating middle housing, and sort of the customized strategy that Sherwood is using to designate certain areas for specific types of housing, of middle housing. And the new hospitality zone concept, and kind of explain how that came about and how that might work. Looking at the transportation plan, that'll kind of summarize some of the key transportation features within Sherwood West. Obviously, Elwert Road has been one of the main focus areas, and it's obviously a key north-south route, and the potential realignment of that road. We'll talk about that. Obviously, the sort of the technical details, again, will be sort of more in the appendix, but this will also, we'll sort of get into that diagram of the north-south connectivity concept, at least mention that is something that has been considered as part of this process, and we're sort of forwarding for further evaluation as part of our recommendations for implementation in the future. And then talking about parks and trails and utilities, so stormwater, all of these kind of infrastructure pieces that are really critical to the future development of Sherwood West. And then we'll follow up with the implementation steps, which I think that section will be really important, because that's where the city is taking all of this sort of concept plan framework and moving it forward into the more concrete, comprehensive planning and zoning, identifying infrastructure needs, and a more kind of fleshed out funding strategy, doing additional analysis on some of the transportation pieces, the Elwert Road design, more in-depth cost analysis for a bridge construction, further consideration of the natural resource protection and how that'll factor into the land uses, various zoning strategies. We've talked about very specific kind of zoning strategies that have kind of emerged through this process, and we'll kind of explain and provide some more recommendations for those as well. So you have a more kind of annotated version of that outline in your packet. So if anyone has, and I'll just mention that there will be a lot of information in the appendix. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is basically a lot of the kind of deliverables that you've seen throughout the project will kind of include in the appendix. And folks that are really interested in kind of delving more into the details can refer to that. So does anybody have questions about the concept plan or what's in it, or do you have any suggestions for things that we might have left out? Yeah.
One of the things that I think we touched on before, but I just kind of would love to reiterate, was there a plan for the schools that the school district suggested would be necessary in this?
Yeah,
About it, but I don't see it, so.
Well, definitely, yeah. It might be under kind of hidden under public facilities or community facilities, something like that. But yeah, schools of course will be a key, a key component of public services. Maybe is it under public services? Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. My computer went to sleep. Yes, so to the extent that we can talk about school planning, I mean, we have some materials that we have kind of reviewed with you all in the past, and what the sort of general expectations are for school needs. We'll kind of describe those.
No, well, okay, go ahead. I had a couple of questions.
That's
but go
okay.
ahead with
Yeah,
the
so it
school
does show
thing.
the one middle school approximately 30 acres and an elementary school at 10 acres. So if we don't have a spot where those are going to particularly be placed, then how do we work that in? Is that taking out, commercial? Is that going to take out residential? Where do we fit that in?
Yeah, so I mean that was a choice that was made by this group actually sometime last year. Some of you remember that, but really the school need will kind of follow several years of development in Sherwood West. There's not an immediate need to build schools kind of as Sherwood West starts to develop. So that was decided with with input from the school district, and schools don't tend to acquire property and land bank it over the long term. I mean, that's my general understanding. So that when it comes time that they're heading towards a need for additional capacity, they will be looking at different properties, and we've talked about the different kinds of physical features that they will be looking for. Generally, flatter topography, good transportation access, proximity to residential areas, and those sorts of things. But it's not the city of Sherwood's job to kind of identify specific locations for schools. It's really the school district's job when the time is right. So that's why we wanted to make sure that we identified that there would be land needs for those school sites, and that those would kind of we factored them into the sort of housing and jobs metrics that we put together. The total housing units and total acres for employment and things like that. But does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Jean.
So a couple comments on the transportation plan. When you go through and explain it, will you touch on both Elbert Road design options? Will there be pictures of both in the process, or at least through the transportation plan vetting out why we chose one or the other? I guess seen in some of this, we had as a committee, we had a lot of heartache and a couple of pain points in the process, and it would be nice to, in the main document, it hit on a couple of those pain points, just so that when someone looks at it, because I'm trying to envision when it comes before the city council or Metro, when we do the urban growth expansion, we're going to be looking towards this document for zoning and how things are going to be implemented. And to see one option without understanding the background, future readers of the document should understand that this wasn't a unanimous vote in some instances, or maybe it was ultimately, but how we got there, I think, is helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think we are recommending the realignment, and that I think that's been generally supported by the CAC. Not everyone has been on the same page about that, but I think that's been the general consensus. The majority opinion, I should say, that is a better approach for various reasons. And just kind of explaining sort of high level what those reasons are.
I think it would be helpful for posterity to document that there was an alternative, and
right.
And initially, I think the alternative is going to be in play until such time that the funding's going to happen in one way or the other. So
yeah, I think that's a good point. And those two alternatives are really well defined in the preliminary concept plan, and so we were really bringing those two alternatives forward: the existing alignment and the realignment. So we can pull from the analysis in the preliminary plan as well.
Thank you. And the other comment has to do with the land use and the housing. I want to somehow put a pin or a placeholder in there that as House Bill 2001 continues to be vetted through the court system and other aspects, the tool that would ensure that it develops in a way that the committee's visioning it is through master planning, if the House Bill 2001 would have allowed it. If it ever gets revisited and that option's there, I'd like to have that placeholder in our concept plan that we as a community have expressed concern about the middle housing not being the same vision as the single family residential areas that we want. And if we can master plan the community, that was the intent, was that we could master plan and put cottages here, put our multifamily here, and have our single family here. And without the tool of master planning currently allowed through the state, it would be nice to say if they change it through the legislative process that we have that mentioned in our plan.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I think so. When you say that the tool of master planning is not available or hasn't been allowed by the state, can you clarify what you mean by that?
So Eric explained it to us that, like in the Frog Pond area and the Villebois area, the master planning was allowed, and it was allowed after House Bill 2001 was implemented because the master plan was in place prior to that legislative action. And now anybody coming in with a subsequent plan is not going to be allowed that tool, is my understanding. And if I'm wrong, that would be great to be wrong.
I can.
HB 2001 allows master planning as an option. The challenge with it is for the planned area, for our size city, you have to be at an average of 15 units per acre.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start to do the math, trying to get like cottage cluster, lower density and high density, you got to build some really high density stuff to get the math to work out. That's my.
Well, you don't have to build it, but you have to allow it. Yeah.
But the plan has to.
You have to plan for it. Yeah. So actually, the Frog Pond example in Wilsonville, they are going through or have just recently completed the master planning process for a Frog Pond East and South, so sort of the second part of that area. So and that was after adoption of HB 2001, and so they were allowed to do that, and they've designated certain areas for certain types of housing, but it is a lot. It's maybe more flexible than it would have been in the past, and there's more allowance for middle housing. And actually, Wilsonville has been intentional about wanting to encourage middle housing, so kind of a different situation. But yeah, master planning is definitely still possible, but it has to incorporate middle housing. And there's sort of, a minimum level of density that needs to be anticipated.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, so we can mention that and the fact that the city is interested in using that as a tool.
Go back to the committee and ask, but I misunderstood when we said before that it's possible, not practical. Thank you.
questions about what'll be in the plan or how we describe certain things? Obviously, you'll have a chance to review the draft at the next CAC meeting. But yeah, go ahead.
As far as the options go for the Elward Edie revision of that road, could that be mentioned under the alternative, as far as the land use alternatives? We could bring up the fact that of these three alternatives, one included. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying. So we actually didn't vary the transportation network as part of the three alternatives. I don't know if you remember, there was that chip game exercise, and it was really more focused on the sort of the colors on the map, the land use designations. And we really didn't have, by that point, I believe that the committee had already kind of generally recommended the realignment as the preferred approach for Elwert. So it wasn't really one of the alternatives that were considered. So, I mean, we will talk about it, but I don't know that we will include it in that particular section necessarily. And of course, I wasn't here for the first kind of half of the process. One of my colleagues was in my place, so I missed all of the discussions that led to Elwert, being kind of the recommendation. So if there's anything I'm missing, you all can fill me in. Okay.
Are you going to be drafting it then?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I'm not going to hand it off to somebody else.
no, I was just wondering, from the TAC and the CAC, I guess what I recall from that was the TAC's comment was that if we kept the alignment the same, it would be overpass under crossing. And that was, a challenge to see, because that creates a bigger division in the community than trying to go around. And I think that's, besides the fact that it might cost more, that was if I remember correctly, have someone else from the committee chime in as to why we landed on that. Yeah.
I think actually the cost was part of the discussion, but if I remember right, because of the wetlands there, the cost to expand there was actually more than elsewhere. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, and that's actually explained in the preliminary concept plan, that either way, improvements to Elwert would have pretty significant impacts to natural resources, or you either need to create new bridges over the Chicken Creek, or, well, either way, I guess you need to create bridges over Chicken Creek. But keeping the existing alignment would actually have a larger impact on the natural resources, and because of the improvements that would be necessary to preserve that alignment, it would be actually more expensive. But there haven't been detailed recent cost estimates or analysis of those two different approaches, and that is one of the things that we will be recommending as an implementation measure, is to take that more detailed analytical look as part of a separate project.
So is that maybe then, Jean, what you're saying, that we're saying we'd like to say there's still other options, that wasn't the final thing, more than just that one needs to be addressed deeper into the financial down of everything. So that's why we want to at least mention it in our plan, so that it continues to be looked at as other options.
Right, so that
Gotcha.
the concept plan has that flexibility.
Gotcha.
In case something else comes up that it's unforeseen.
Yeah.
Good point. or all the north-south connectors either. What's the implementation steps? When you come back with the plan, and how will this tool be used? So I think it's important when we're reviewing the document, I almost asked a question. I remembered this is not a comprehensive plan, it's a concept plan. Comprehensive plan has a specific legal use when we are doing zone changes and looking at it versus a concept plan. And so just for teaching us how this is going to be used, can you give us like what's the document going to be used for, and how stringent, like if you say this shall happen in this area, is it a shall or a may, and under what circumstances? When we read the document, do we get scared? Goes, that I didn't mean it for it to be green there. I wanted it to be green over here. What does all that mean when we go forward, and how is the city council and the planning department going to use it when they get the document accepted?
Good question. I might defer to Erica. She probably has a better answer than I do.
Excellent question. So this document will be used kind of as a guiding document. It's really a vision tool, an exercise of how this area should develop and grow over time. And we know that when we're talking about all these infrastructure projects, roads, sewer, water, we're going to have to look at that, all of those things in additional detail. So things may change, and we recognize that. So honestly, guiding document, nothing's, stamped in stone with this concept plan, but it really just helps inform future decisions in the future.
And it's really critical to demonstrate to Metro and to the state that the city went through this process and considered all of these different factors and has a plan for, a transportation network and housing and protecting natural resources, and that the city has thought about this and has a vision and has a guiding document to take those next more sort of detailed steps.
Guiding, not legally binding.
Not legally binding, right? That's the comprehensive planning exercise that would follow if the area were to be, brought into the urban growth boundary. So the implementation, we have some ideas or some sort of bullet points in the outline in your packet for implementation measures. So one will be the Metro Title 11 compliance summary. So those are kind of all of the items that Metro requires for a concept plan for that to be approved, and then they can sign off on it. That would be part of their signing off on an urban growth boundary expansion. The infrastructure funding strategy, so sort of more detailed recommendations for how to approach that. Future zoning, developing policies, land use. Again, those kind of customized tools for new types of zoning, like a hospitality zone or a hospitality overlay. Focusing on middle housing. The natural resource protection will be, again, that'll have to be considered as part of the comprehensive planning process, how the city will use its program to protect those resources while still, allowing for development that considers mitigation and things like that. Annexation policies, transportation analysis and feasibility studies and funding tools. And then recommendations for, additional future continued community engagement. Obviously, this is not the end of the city's process. Collaborating with community members, that'll be an important component of, all additional future steps. So that's sort of the high level view, and you'll see some more detailed implementation recommendations when you see the draft at the next meeting, and then you all can tell us if we missed anything or got anything wrong. Any other questions about the outline?
Yeah, I had a question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had a question. What kind of lead time will we get to take a look at the final version before the next meeting?
Well, it won't be the final version, but it'll be just a draft.
Right, the draft.
But it'll be a complete draft. Normally it's only a week, but are you asking for more time?
I just think, that's a pretty, we've been working on this for, like a year and a half, 2 years. And so just having a longer runway to, kind of look at it, review it before the meeting would be preferred.
Okay. We can probably accommodate that. Well, yeah. We haven't settled on a specific date yet, so we'll factor that in. All right, should we talk about maps? So not a ton of changes, and hopefully you can see this either here or in your packets. But we did, we heard your comments at the last meeting, and we made a few, mostly fairly minor changes, but one of the more significant ones was just, is my cursor visible here? For the community parks, there was general agreement about this one park kind of nestled in with Chicken Creek here, what we've been calling the Sand Trap area. But we presented a couple different options for the second community park in the northern North District. And so initially we were showing the community park in this sort of triangular shaped parcel on Edie Road. And the direction from the CAC was to go with option B, which was to move the community park across Elwert Road to this area, kind of just south of the mixed employment and also adjacent to some housing areas here. So, and the acreage, it looks a lot smaller on the map, but it's actually not too much smaller than the area that it was shown previously, so it didn't have a whole lot of impact on sort of total housing units and acres. So that was one change. We had been showing an area of middle housing designation in this northwest corner, because we'd heard previously that having sort of a residential buffer between the employment area and the agricultural areas outside of Sherwood West might be helpful or might be a better transition. And what we heard from both the TAC and then we talked to you all about it at the last meeting was that actually employment uses might be better sort of neighbors and more compatible neighbors to agricultural uses because of sort of the intensity of the use. There's not as many kind of people in that area, so and there's also the opportunity to have pretty wide, generous sort of landscape buffers between those two uses. So and there were concerns about kind of the loss of that employment land and also kind of relegating just this one corner of housing kind of surrounded by a bunch of employment land seemed a little off. So we changed that back to mixed employment. So that's all, this whole area in the Northern District is mixed employment. Those were the only changes to the land use designations. We made one small change to how the transportation network is depicted. Maybe I'll show that on the next map. So this is the Elwert Road realignment recommendation. And so the current alignment here, the previous map was just still showing that as a road. And it was a little confusing as to what, cars who came to this spot, what would they be doing? And so we just removed the line from the map. That doesn't necessarily mean that the roadway will entirely be replaced. That has yet to be determined, but this at least shows that this realignment will be the new, Elwert and Edie alignment. And we talked about at the last meeting about different options for kind of controlling the flow of traffic to make sure that access to the existing Elwert alignment is really only for folks that live right off that road or have property right off that road. And I actually accidentally jumped forward, but these are the open space and parks and trails maps. Those haven't really changed a whole lot other than moving the community park to that spot. No other changes to the street network, except for one minor sort of labeling change, which is we talked about at the last meeting this conceptual crossing of Highway 99 to connect to the Brookman Road and the Brookman area. And we changed that from saying an overcrossing to a separated grade crossing because that's still very conceptual, and that again would need further design and analysis to determine what type of crossing that might be. So we just changed it to separated grade crossing to make it more general. And this is just showing kind of a combined transportation network that includes both roads and trails to show all of the different active transportation options and connections to existing trails and other areas that, you know, the trails and roads network will make key connections to. So we're hoping these maps are in good shape to include in the concept plan, but we did want to hear if you have any kind of last tweaks or modifications that you're wanting to make. Maybe I'll go back to the land use map.
Do you have with the changes that were made, jobs to housing ratio? An updated number, or not that you would give me a number right this second. I don't.
Okay.
It's not a pop quiz.
Yeah.
But is that incorporated in here somehow so that it's?
We have it. We
Yeah.
didn't include it in the packet because it didn't change a lot. But
included in the outline. Is it going to be in?
will it be in the final report? Yes, definitely in the report. I'm not sure if those will end up in the body of the report or in an appendix, but those tables that you saw of, you know, total units, density, acreages, and the sort of different middle housing scenarios, and then the employment numbers. Yes, those will definitely be in the report.
I think they should be, in my opinion, they should be in the main report, and it also should have an explanation or a rationale that from preliminary concept plan done many years ago to where we're at now, the vision and the direction from the council has changed so that we have a jobs balance to help solidify our budget. I mean, that really helps understand, and when land comes in, when they look at this concept plan, understanding that balancing jobs to houses was an important factor in creating these land designations. Rather than buried in an appendix, I think it's an important concept in here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we can do that. Okay, thank you. Back to the maps. Do these look like they are reflecting what you all have told us and you're happy with them, more or less? Great. If you think of any comments, obviously, you know, reach out to Erica. We're still, you know, everything's still a draft, so nothing's final yet.
One of the comments that we had from the citizen comments was the hospitality area that's marked in here.
Yeah.
I guess I know that we don't have a hospitality zone currently in the city of Sherwood, and so in implementation steps, that has not been discussed on whether it's an overlay, a complete zoning. I mean, we've always talked about it as being a zoning area, but that it hasn't been finalized one way or the other as to the flexibility or what would be part of that. I think. Right, and I think people who are interested in that can see the process. That's going to be an actual public hearings process through the council. Yeah, absolutely. It'll be an absolutely public process, and those people that are interested in seeing how it goes through, those are some of the next steps that public engagement will be critical in helping us form those ideas that are going to make it.
That's the same for like the cottage clusters and things like that. We talked about zoning specifically for that as well, right? Which will all be the same process.
Zoning, it kind of exists because House Bill 2001 required that we adopt cottage clusters within our development code already. We had a deadline to meet last summer, so cottage.
At one point, we talked about making an actual specific zone
So,
for
we-
that.
we don't have.
The goal being that you have zoning that's cottage cluster only.
Only.
You don't have it.
Right, right.
But that's all more comprehensive as opposed to our concept plan, right?
Yes. Nice. Very public process and another way to get engaged as you go through it. So a color on a map, it's only a concept, so the color may change when Metro process goes through the process, but some of the other steps still are onto the side. The annexation one, you put in an implementation step, is that our steps in how you annex will be going through a public process to implement within our code.
Yes. Yeah, so we can include options for how you might potentially have develop a hospitality zone or overlay or whatever that tool is. We can talk about different options, and if we have any examples that we can point to, we can include those. And same thing for like the cottage cluster zone. We can describe that and describe the intent, but we're not writing the zone as part of this process. Yeah.
Right. But if we can copy someone else's homework on that, that's great. Yeah, absolutely not. What? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Anything else? I think that was our last item to discuss. So we'll talk about next steps. We'll come back to you at the next meeting with an update to the infrastructure funding strategy with more fleshed out numbers and then also some more concrete recommendations. We will prepare the draft concept plan so you can take a look at it. We'll try to get it to you more than a week in advance. We'll commit to a time frame so that you all have plenty of time to review it. We'll have our final meeting, and then we'll make some additional changes to the concept plan and then bring it forward to the Planning Commission and City Council, and that will start the adoption process at that point. So, and there's, of course, more opportunity for public to participate in that, testify, provide written comments, that sort of thing. So, and then the city can take it from there.
Can I make a request?
Sure.
You talked about the environmental impact and feeling that the current alignment of Elbert would have had more impact. You've done some analysis in the past. We're talking about including more background from various aspects to give people consuming the plan an idea of how you arrive at the decisions. It'd be great to have that discussion in there because as someone who's familiar with the area, it's very hard to visualize how an existing road bed would be considered to improve that and to environmentally remediate. I'm having trouble with the word. Fix it. Remediate. To take that effect, regardless of cost, how that would be considered more impactful than impacting two untouched areas. It's just very counterintuitive. So if you could address specifically that sort of thought process, how that conclusion was arrived at, that'd be helpful in terms of providing background.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and we can do that, but you got to keep in mind that the county has that designated as a four lane or 5 lane arterial. What's the correct term? Arterial. So they're going to make it, when that goes to 5 lanes, if you did it that way, you're going to come up with all of these things. The road is today doesn't speed it, so you would require a lot more. How would that go for that? But yeah,
Yeah, we will include more of that background information and how we all reached that conclusion or recommendation. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
I think we had one more public comment. I know that we're a little bit early, and I just want to make sure that everybody can have their say into this process.
Scoot that by. Is this on? Okay. So my name is Leif Hansen. I live on E Road. New to the area from Tigard. We built a house there a couple years ago. And so I'm kind of talking as a layman. This is the first time I've been here. And I got interested at this winter because some people above me are friends of mine that feel they're going to be affected if they realign the road up above us. So my question was kind of to your point, was I drive down E Road every day. I'm out in Elwood. I've been there when it's flooded at the intersection, and just looking at it and being in construction and building all my life and understanding costs, I can't fathom that it would cost more to raise that bed up, maybe 10 feet, cut some down and widen it, and take the wetlands there and reappropriate that wetlands to another area, which is legal under federal law, and just keep it straight. And my other point on that is that that is a bypass for people coming from other areas through Sherwood to go somewhere, for the most part. And does anybody come up with the idea that what is it going to be, the traffic's going to be there after Roy Rogers is done, which is going to be 5 to 8 years, I'm guessing, before that 4 lanes goes through all the way to I-5. And then why didn't we make a continual right turn lane at 99 and Roy Rogers for all 4 corners so no one would stop that's cutting through Sherwood to go to Newburgh? I actually walked the street, and you could have done that, and there wouldn't be a problem with all the traffic jams that are happening right now. And so that was just my comments on that, because I can't imagine that cut through that I'm seeing all the way through, building the bridge, taking people's land, wiping out farms, all this stuff for all that winding road through there instead of that straight shot and just widening it. I can't accept that as being more cost effective to do it. And the last thing is does anybody here, and I'm just asking, I'm a layman, I'm new, so pardon me if I offend anybody, but does anybody here have a true vision of what you want Sherwood to be in 20 years? Really what you want it to be? Because right now it's a bedroom community. It's been that way forever. A lot of people moved here to retire. I see retired people here, and there's going to be more retired people here. Fixed income, they came here for quality of life, and it was a bedroom community. It's also one more thing. It's a gateway to the next Napa Valley. I'm getting into the wine business. I put in a vineyard behind my property. I have 4 acres in vines. And this whole area in the valley here is everybody has to come on this road. If you want to get to McMinnville or anywhere, you have to drive this road. And people are flying here from around the world. And I don't know if you remember when Stephanie Inn opened up, 10, 15 years ago, we went there right after it opened, and I went, there's no way this place is going to survive. This place will close down in a year because it's in the middle of nowhere. Well, the people had vision that built that, and that place is packed now all the time, and it's from people from around the world that stay there, and they do the vineyards. And you're talking $1 billion plus of net worth individuals that drive through Sherwood, that go into these vineyards and travel and spend the time here in this beautiful land. What's the vision of Sherwood being the gateway in 20 years? Has anybody thought of that? Instead of just building houses and building houses. And my calculations, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the state is requiring that you have a plan to add additional housing. And my understanding is it's 600 homes in the next 20 years. Is that correct? Anybody know? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, see, okay, so I was at an earlier meeting, and they told me that you had to have 600 homes. Okay, if it's 15 homes per acre, that's only 40 acres. So why are we taking all this land for 600 homes? That's all I have to say.
All right, so I'll be sending out a doodle poll and doing some calendaring tomorrow. So you'll be hearing from me over the next couple days so we can set up our very last meeting. So I thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.